remember the sound before anything else, the sound of my wedding dress rustling in the dark. It was such a faint whisper, soft and trembling, yet it didn't come from me. That's what made my heart stop. I stood there, frozen in the hallway outside the dressing room, the hem of my satin robe brushing against my legs, the faint scent of lilies and perfume mixing in the air, and I thought for one wild, disbelieving second, someone else was wearing my gown. You never forget the feeling of your heart skipping into silence. I could see the faint sliver of light spilling out from the cracked door ahead, the edge of a white veil glimmering in the gap, and a shadow moving inside the room. My first thought was that maybe one of the bridesmaids had come in to check the fit. But there was no laughter, no small talk, none of that excited chaos weddings are supposed to have. Just silence, and the faint sound of breathing that wasn't mine. It was 2 days before the ceremony. My best man, Adam, had insisted on helping with final arrangements because my fiancé was stuck out of town for work. Adam was my oldest friend, the kind of person you grow up with through every heartbreak, every stupid phase, every little thing that shapes who you become. He'd been in my life since I was 12. We'd shared everything. Secrets, late-night talks, even tears when life got too heavy. I trusted him more than anyone. Which is why, when I finally pushed that door open, I thought I must have been hallucinating. The sight hit me all at once. The mirror reflected a shape I knew and didn't know. Adam, standing in front of it, wearing my wedding dress. He wasn't just trying it on for a joke like some prank. No, it wasn't that kind of scene. His face was pale, trembling, eyes glassy as if he'd been crying for a long time. The bodice fit him surprisingly well. He'd adjusted the straps carefully. His hands shaking as he brushed a strand of hair behind his ear, staring at himself as though the reflection might break. He didn't see me at first. I could have turned back, could have pretended I'd never seen it, but something rooted me to that spot. There was something fragile in the way he stood, like someone who had finally stopped running from something unbearable. Adam! My voice barely came out, a whisper carried by fear and confusion. He turned slowly, and the look in his eyes. God, I'll never forget it. It wasn't embarrassment or panic. It was something deeper, raw, like I just walked into the most private part of his soul. I didn't mean for you to see this, he said softly. His voice cracked in the middle, but he didn't move, didn't cover himself, didn't even flinch. I just needed to know what it felt like. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too heavy. I didn't know what to say. I'd known Adam for so long, but this was something I'd never imagined. He wasn't mocking me. There was no humor in his tone. Only pain and something like peace if peace could come with tears. I remember noticing the smallest details. The way his fingers trembled as he touched the lace on the sleeve. The way the veil shimmered under the light. The way his chest rose and fell like someone finally letting themselves breathe after years of holding it in. Why my dress? I finally asked, my voice shaking. He swallowed, his gaze falling back to the mirror. Because it's beautiful. Because you get to be everything I've never been allowed to be. Because when I saw you try it on, you looked like you belonged to a world I've only dreamed of. There was no judgment in his words. Just longing. And that's when something inside me shifted from shock to understanding. At least a small part of it. He stepped back, catching sight of himself in the mirror again, and I could see the battle in his expression. Guilt, shame, and something like surrender. I thought if I could just feel it for one moment, he said quietly, maybe it would stop hurting. I should have been angry. It was my wedding dress. My moment, my day he'd stepped into. But somehow I couldn't find anger. Just 1,000 questions, none of which I was ready to ask. There was something sacred about the vulnerability in front of me, something that felt too human to condemn. So I didn't shout. I didn't demand an explanation. I just whispered his name again, softer this time, like I was afraid to wake a dream. Adam. He closed his eyes. I'm sorry. I know how this looks. I'll take it off. But I shook my head slowly, even though my heart was still hammering. No, don't. Not yet. For reasons I couldn't explain, I wanted to see him, really see him. Not as my best friend, Not as the man who'd been there for me through everything, but as the person standing before me, trembling between two identities. The silence between us stretched until it became something else, something neither of us could name. And that was the moment I realized. My best man wasn't just keeping a secret. He was living one. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing there again, framed in the mirror, wearing that gown like it was the only way he could exist in peace. I replayed every detail until it felt like a loop I couldn't escape. The weight of the moment pressed against my chest long after I'd gone to bed, long after I'd folded the dress back into its bag and pretended nothing had happened. Morning came slow, like the world was reluctant to face the truth too. My phone buzzed with wedding notifications. Florists, photographers, my mother asking about centerpieces, and I stared at it all as if it belonged to someone else's life. My best friend had tried on my wedding dress, and I didn't even know what that meant. When I finally saw Adam again, it was like the universe had forgotten what normal looked like. He showed up at the venue with coffee in hand, wearing his usual grin, the kind that had always calmed me down before big moments. Except this time I saw something else in it. A faint tightness in his jaw. A flicker in his eyes that said he was waiting for me to speak first. "I didn't tell anyone," I said finally, as we stood near the empty chairs lined up for the rehearsal. He exhaled, a long shaky breath that told me how afraid he'd been of that sentence. "Thank you," he murmured. I studied him for a while. It was strange, seeing him like this, pretending everything was fine when there was a truth hovering between us that neither of us knew how to name. I'd always thought I knew every version of Adam. The funny one, the steady one, the fiercely loyal one. But this was something new. Something deeper. "Adam," I said softly, "how long have you felt like that?" He looked at me, startled. Then he smiled. Not in amusement, but the sad, small kind of smile you give when you're caught between confession and fear. "You make it sound like it's new," he said. "It's not. It's been there since before we met. I just got really good at hiding it." I frowned, trying to piece the past together. "Hiding what exactly?" He hesitated. The air between us shifted again. "Hiding her," he said quietly. "The part of me that doesn't fit the name everyone calls." The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd heard of stories like that, but never from someone I loved. Never from the person who'd carried me through breakups, bad grades, late-night panic attacks. He wasn't just my best man. He'd been the person who always knew who I was. And now I realized I hadn't really known him. "Her," I repeated slowly, testing the word. It felt strange at first, but it didn't sound wrong. He nodded, his gaze falling to the floor. "I don't even know if I deserve that word. I feel closer to it than to the one I was given. I tried to bury it for years. Tried to laugh it off, date girls, be one of the guys. But every time I helped you with your dresses or heard you talk about your wedding, I couldn't stop imagining what it would feel like to stand there. Not as your best man, but as..." He trailed off, his voice breaking. I finished for him, quietly. "As the bride." He flinched but didn't deny it. A gust of wind blew through the open doors, stirring the petals on the floor. For a moment it felt like everything around us, the chairs, the music sheets, the fabric, was listening. "Adam," I said carefully, "you don't have to hide from me." He laughed weakly. "You say that now. Wait until your fiancé finds out I was wearing your dress. He's going to kill me." I smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I'm not telling him. Not until you're ready to tell me what this really means." He looked up, surprised. "You don't hate me." I shook my head. "I don't even understand it yet. But no, I don't hate you." His eyes shimmered, and for a second I saw a flicker of that same piece I'd seen in the mirror, the one he'd only found when he'd allowed himself to exist freely. Over the next few days, things shifted between us in quiet ways. He'd linger a little longer when we talked. He helped me pick out jewelry, but this time I caught the longing in his eyes when he held the earrings up to the light. Once, when no one else was around, I let him help me lace up my dress again for a fitting. His hands shook, not from nerves but from reverence. I could feel the tension between who he was and who he wanted to be growing with every breath. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't even awkward. It was just fragile, like watching someone slowly take shape in front of you after years of being blurred. But the night before the wedding, that fragile piece cracked. We were sitting in the empty reception hall, surrounded by half-folded napkins and flickering candles. Everyone else had gone home. I remember turning to him and asking, "If you could wear anything tomorrow, anything at all, what would it be?" He hesitated, his eyes glistening in the candlelight. Then he whispered, "The dress." I smiled sadly. "Mine." He nodded. "No one's ever let me feel beautiful before." The words stayed with me, echoing in the stillness of that hall. No one's ever let me feel beautiful before. That was when I realized, maybe this wasn't about a dress or a secret or even the wedding. Maybe it was about someone finally wanting permission to be seen. And part of me knew deep down that something was going to happen the next day that would change everything. The morning of the wedding began with rain. Not the soft kind that falls quietly, but the kind that feels alive. Heavy drops against glass, thunder rolling somewhere distant, the sky bruised with gray. I remember thinking how strange it was, how everything I'd planned to perfection was suddenly at the mercy of a storm. But maybe that was fitting. Maybe life was warning me that nothing about that day would go the way I imagined. The bridal suite was a blur of motion, hair, makeup, laughter that didn't feel real. I smiled when people looked, but inside I was somewhere else entirely. I couldn't stop thinking about Adam. The way his voice had sounded the night before. The tremor when he said he just wanted to feel beautiful. I'd told myself to focus on my vows, on my fiancé waiting at the altar, on the hundreds of eyes that would soon turn toward me. But my heart kept circling back to the person sitting just a few rooms away, wearing a tuxedo that didn't feel like his own skin. Every few minutes, I caught myself staring at the closet where my dress hung. That same dress he'd worn days earlier. It felt different now, heavier, almost sentient, as if it carried two souls inside it. I couldn't explain why, but part of me felt like the dress itself was waiting for something, holding its breath. When Adam finally came in to check on me, the air shifted. He looked composed, but his eyes betrayed him. His usual easy grin was gone. He stood by the doorway, straightening his tie, pretending to be casual. But I could see the battle behind his expression. "You look incredible," he said softly. I smiled faintly. "I haven't even put it on yet." He laughed a little, but it sounded hollow. "You don't need to. You've always had that kind of light." For a few seconds we just stood there. Two people pretending to be fine while everything underneath us cracked open. I took a deep breath. "Adam, about last night." He held up a hand gently. "You don't have to say anything." I meant what I said. "It's your day." I just wanted to help make it perfect. I wanted to tell him that perfection didn't matter anymore, that something about yesterday had changed how I saw him. But before I could speak, one of the bridesmaids burst in, announcing that the photographer had arrived. The moment vanished like smoke. Hours passed in fragments. Photos, makeup retouches, music rehearsals, guests arriving with umbrellas. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the kind that painted everything silver. And then came the call I'd been waiting for all morning. It was time to get dressed. Everyone else left the room except Adam. I don't know why. Maybe because fate has a cruel sense of timing, but somehow we ended up alone again. The dress lay across the chair, shimmering in the muted light. "Do you want me to help?" he asked quietly. He nodded. He moved behind me, his hands gentle as he unzipped the garment bag. The sound was soft, delicate. I could feel the tension in him, not desire but reverence. When he lifted the gown, I saw his reflection in the mirror, his fingers tracing the lace as though it were sacred. I stepped into the dress slowly. He laced the back, pulling the ribbons with practiced care. And when our eyes met in the mirror, I saw it again, that same flicker of longing, the quiet ache of someone standing inches away from what they'd been denied their whole life. "Perfect," he whispered. But his voice cracked on the last syllable. I turned around, meeting his gaze directly. You could have been honest with me sooner. He looked startled. Would it have changed anything? I hesitated, searching for the truth. Maybe I would have understood. His lips trembled into something between a smile and a grimace. No one ever does. Before I could answer, someone called my name from the hallway. My mother's voice, cheerful, unaware. Honey, are you ready? I looked at Adam. Go ahead. I'll be right there. He nodded and walked out slowly, leaving a silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. When the door clicked shut, I turned back to the mirror and saw more than a bride. I saw a reflection layered with questions. Who I was, who he was, and what it meant that his secret had somehow woven itself into the fabric of this day. The ceremony began minutes later. The church glowed with candlelight, the scent of roses and rain filling the air. I remember walking down the aisle, the crowd rising, the music swelling. My fiancé's eyes were bright, steady, everything they should have been. And yet, as I stepped closer, my gaze flickered, just for a second, toward Adam standing at the altar just beside him. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. Something inside him was unraveling, thread by thread. When the priest began to speak, I tried to focus. On love, on vows, on forever. But every word felt heavier than the last. By the time we reached the part where he said, "If anyone has reason why these two should not be joined," my pulse spiked without reason. No one spoke. The room was still. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Adam step back slightly, his hands trembling. His face had gone pale, and I knew, without understanding how, that something inside him was breaking open. And when his eyes met mine across the room, there was so much emotion in them that it nearly stole my breath away. Sorrow, longing, apology, and something else. Something like goodbye. The moment our eyes locked, time seemed to stop. The priest's voice faded, the guests blurred. Even the rain outside ceased to exist. There was only Adam, standing there in his black suit, face pale under the stained glass light, trembling as though every secret he had ever buried was suddenly demanding to be seen. I remember the faintest shake of his head, the kind of gesture that says I can't do this anymore. My heart clenched. I didn't know what he meant, not yet, but I could feel something inside him collapsing. And then, before anyone could move, he turned and walked out of the church. At first, it didn't even register. My fiancé glanced toward the door, confused. A ripple went through the crowd. Whispers, rustling fabric, murmurs of, "Is he okay?" But all I could do was stare at the empty space where he'd stood seconds ago. The spot beside my soon-to-be husband looked hollow without him, as though part of the ceremony's balance had been quietly stolen away. The priest hesitated. "Shall we continue?" I nodded automatically, but the words didn't mean anything. Everything from that point on felt mechanical, the vows, the rings, the applause. I smiled when I was supposed to, kissed when I was expected to, but inside I was miles away. When it was over, when the music played and the guests began filing out with laughter and cheers, I slipped away. I didn't even tell my new husband where I was going. My heels clicked down the marble hallway, echoing like small thunderclaps as I searched every corridor of that church. And then I saw him, outside under the overhang in the fading drizzle. His jacket was off, shirt sleeves soaked, the tie hanging loose around his neck. He was sitting on the steps, staring at nothing. I hesitated in the doorway, still in my gown, veil damp from the mist. For a second, we must have looked like a strange photograph. The bride and the best man, both half ruined by something neither of us could explain. "Adam," I whispered. He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, his eyes were red. "You shouldn't be out here. You're supposed to be inside. It's your day." "I think you just ruined it," I said, but my voice was soft. Not angry, just tired. He gave a broken laugh. "Yeah, I'm good at that." I sat down beside him, careful not to let my dress touch the puddles. The sound of the rain hitting the pavement filled the silence between us. "Why did you leave?" I asked finally. He took a long breath. "Because I couldn't stand there and pretend anymore. Not after everything. Not with you looking at me like you saw me. I did see you, I said quietly. I still do. He turned to me, eyes shining. You don't understand. When I looked at you walking down that aisle, you were everything I wished I could be. Graceful, certain, seen. And I realized I'll never have that. Not like this. Not without losing everything else. I wanted to reach for him, but my hands froze. There was a fragility in his voice, the kind that breaks if you touch it too soon. Adam, I murmured, you don't have to lose yourself to exist. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. You don't get it. I've spent my whole life pretending to be someone people respect. The reliable guy, the friend, the one who helps everyone else. But inside I've been screaming for years. Every time I watched you put on that dress, I wasn't jealous of the moment. I was jealous of the permission. You get to be who you are and no one questions it. I wear that dress for 5 minutes and the world would call me broken. His words pierced something in me. The rain softened, turning into mist around us. I didn't have answers, just questions. For him, for myself, for the world that had made him hide so long. You could have told me sooner, I said gently. I would have listened. I know, he said. But I wasn't ready to hear myself. That silence that followed was thick with everything we didn't know how to say. The wind tugged at my veil. His fingers twitched like he wanted to fix it but didn't dare. Finally I said, you said you wanted to feel beautiful. You did. You looked beautiful. He looked at me then, eyes wide, as if no one had ever said those words to him before. Don't say that, he whispered. I'll believe it. Then believe it, I said, tears stinging my eyes. Just because it scares people doesn't mean it isn't real. For a long time neither of us spoke. The storm cleared slowly, sunlight breaking through the clouds like forgiveness. I could see the reflection of my gown in a puddle, rippling beside his shadow. 2 reflections, side by side, overlapping until they almost became one. When the sound of distant laughter drifted from the reception hall, he stood up. You should go. They'll be looking for you. I nodded, though my heart felt heavier than ever. Will you come inside? He hesitated. No, not yet. Then where will you go? He smiled faintly. Somewhere I can start over. Somewhere I can figure out who I really am, without pretending. And just like that he walked away. I stood there watching him disappear into the sunlight, each step slower than the last, as if leaving a version of himself behind with every footprint. The rain had stopped completely, but I didn't feel the warmth. Just the hollow ache of knowing something sacred had changed forever. Not just in him, but in me too. Weeks passed, but I never stopped replaying that day in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Adam walking away in the rain, shoulders hunched, the faintest trace of peace on his face, as though, for the first time in his life, he wasn't hiding. It haunted me, not because I felt betrayed, but because I finally understood what it meant to lose yourself in order to survive. The wedding photos came back eventually. Smiling faces, flowers, dancing. Everything looked perfect on paper. But when I turned to the photo where Adam should have been standing beside my husband and me, the empty space felt louder than any picture could capture. It was as if the camera itself had known something was missing. My husband didn't talk about him much after that. He'll come around, he'd say whenever I brought it up, but his tone carried a note of irritation, the kind people have when they don't understand something they don't want to try to. I didn't blame him. I barely understood it myself. But silence has a way of turning into gravity. It pulls at you, bends you, reshapes the things you thought were solid. And soon I found myself thinking about Adam in the quiet hours between dawn and day, the way he'd looked at himself in the mirror, the trembling peace of someone standing at the edge of truth. Then one morning out of nowhere I got a message. From unknown number. Message, hi, it's me. I didn't know if I should reach out. But I'm ready to talk if you are. My hands shook as I typed back. Always. We met at a small cafe 2 towns over, far enough from anyone who might recognize us. The moment I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. His hair was longer now, brushed softly to the side, And he wore a simple white blouse with jeans. Nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated, just authentic. But what struck me most wasn't the clothes. It was his expression. Oh. Hey, he said, smiling nervously. Hey, I whispered back, sitting across from him. You look happy. He laughed quietly. I'm getting there. We sat in silence for a while, just letting the moment breathe. The clatter of cups, the low hum of conversation, the smell of coffee, all of it felt distant. For the first time, I wasn't seeing my best man. I was seeing the person he'd always been trying to show me. I've been going by a new name, he said eventually, his voice trembling. It's not official yet, but it feels right. He nodded. What is it? He smiled, eyes glistening. Anna. The name hung in the air like a sunrise. Soft, inevitable, beautiful. It suits you, I said. She looked down, blushing. You think so? I know so. She exhaled shakily, the relief visible in her shoulders. I thought you'd hate me for what I did. For the dress. For ruining your day. You didn't ruin anything, I said. You made me see something I'd been blind to. What courage actually looks like. Her lips quivered. Courage. Yes. You stood in front of a mirror and faced the person you were terrified to be. Most people spend their whole lives avoiding that reflection. Anna laughed softly, wiping her eyes. You always knew how to say things that make me cry. We both smiled then. Not the kind of smile that hides pain, but the kind that comes after it. The kind that feels earned. As we talked, I learned what had happened after she left. She'd moved away for a while, started therapy, found people who understood. She was still scared, still uncertain, but there was light in her voice now. A quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. I'm not ready to tell everyone yet, she said, stirring her coffee. But I'm done pretending. I can finally breathe. I nodded, my throat tightening. That's all that matters. We sat there for hours. The sun shifted, shadows moved across the table, and time seemed to melt around us. It didn't feel like catching up with an old friend. It felt like meeting someone for the first time, and realizing you've known them all along. Before we left, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small photo. It was of us, from years ago at a college party, both laughing so hard we could barely stand. I kept this, she said. It reminds me of who I was before I forgot how to be myself. I smiled, tears prickling my eyes. Keep it. You've earned her back. We stood outside the cafe as the sun began to set, the light turning everything gold. For a moment I just looked at her, the person who had walked through fire and come out softer, not harder. And then she said something I'll never forget. You were the first person to see me. Before I even saw myself. I didn't know how to respond, so I just hugged her. It wasn't the kind of hug you give out of comfort or pity. It was the kind that says I see you now. Truly. When we finally pulled apart, I realized something simple and profound. Love isn't always about romance. Sometimes it's about recognition, the kind that happens when two souls finally stop pretending. It's strange how life rearranges itself when you start seeing people for who they are instead of who you expect them to be. Months passed after that cafe meeting, but the memory of it lived inside me like a steady light. Every word, every tear, every hesitant smile. It became part of how I saw the world. Anna and I stayed in touch. Sometimes we texted daily, sometimes we went weeks without speaking, but the bond never loosened. She'd send photos of herself slowly growing into her name. Softer clothes, brighter eyes, an ease in her posture that I'd never seen before. The person who once lived in the shadow of his own reflection was finally stepping into the light. And I, in my own way, was changing too. Marriage has a way of exposing the unspoken parts of you. What you value, what you hide, what you long for but can't name. I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about love, identity, and acceptance. There was one moment months later that I'll never forget. It was early spring, just after sunset. My husband and I were walking through the park when I saw someone across the path. Tall, graceful, with long hair catching the light. She was wearing a pale blue dress that swayed softly in the breeze. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then she turned, and I saw her smile. Anna. I excused myself and ran across the path, heels clicking against the pavement. She laughed as I reached her, that same familiar sound I'd grown up hearing, only now it carried something new, freedom. You look radiant, I said, breathless. So do you, she said, her eyes kind. Marriage suits you. I smiled, though I wasn't sure if it did. How have you been? Living, she said simply. For the first time, I wake up and the person in the mirror doesn't feel like a stranger. I felt tears in my eyes again, that same ache of joy and grief intertwined. You did it, I whispered. She nodded, looking past me toward the horizon. I did it because someone once told me I looked beautiful, and meant it. The wind carried her words between us, and I realized something profound. One sentence, spoken with kindness, can change an entire life. We sat on a bench, the city lights blinking awake in the distance. The conversation flowed easily. Stories, laughter, quiet moments of reflection. At one point, she pulled out her phone and showed me a picture that made my breath catch. It was her, wearing a dress that looked strikingly familiar. White satin, delicate lace, the faint shimmer of pearls. My wedding dress. You kept it? I asked softly. She smiled. You told me not to take it off that day. I never forgot that. After everything that happened, I found the courage to ask the boutique to make a version for me. It's not the same one, but it's mine now. The world seemed to still around us. The dress that had once symbolized confusion and shame now stood for something else. Rebirth. I wanted you to see it, she said. Because that moment, your kindness, your silence, your understanding, that was the beginning of all this. I didn't know what to say. There are some emotions words can't carry without breaking. So I just reached out and held her hand. For a while we sat like that, two lives forever tied together by a single act of honesty and compassion. The past no longer hurt. It simply existed, like an old scar that no longer stung but still reminded you where you'd healed. When it was time to go, we hugged again. This time it wasn't goodbye. It was a quiet promise that we'd both keep becoming whoever we were meant to be, no matter how long it took. As I walked back toward the street, I looked over my shoulder. She was standing beneath a streetlight, the hem of her dress glowing softly, her face lifted toward the night sky. For the first time she looked completely at peace. And I knew, deep down, that the secret she once carried wasn't a burden anymore. It had become her truth, and her freedom. I turned away, smiling through tears, and whispered to the quiet evening, "You were always meant to wear it." Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our channel.